Storica, blockchain-powered global marketplace for local businesses, sellers and buyers, and help create the open marketplace with a limitless potential for growth. Key features of Storica: packaging, marketing, affiliate marketing, 24/7 customer service, growth. The circulation of the STQ token is built around the system, designed to consolidate business transactions within the platform through smart contracts, which guarantee transparency and openness of Storica. Goods from all over the world with cryptocurrency and token STQ, cryptocurrencies and fiat money exchange. Pay for all Storica services and promote your goods through Marketplace Catalog with STQ. Gain tokens as rewards for referral programs, CPA offers, and community. Using smart contracts to verify delivery status and reviews. As only a limited number of tokens will be issued, STQ will remain in ever-growing demand within the platform and keep growing in value as Storica grows.
That it's basically what it hit the market at. It hasn't done anything since it's come on the market. It hasn't had any moonshots to 6 to 10 cents or anything like that, or 30 cents is what a real moonshot for this one would be. Let's take a look at the markets. Bittrex and Mr. Ripple. All right, you've made 15 times your investment thereabouts, 14, 15 times your investment. That's a pretty good return if it goes up to 30 cents, right? Now let's see why. Obviously there's talk, and I'll just throw this out there. I want to talk about Ripple. I'm not comparing this one to Ripple, but Ripple's circulating supply is 99 billion, and it's already at 20 cents, and we've seen it as high as almost 30 cents. So Cardano does have that kind of potential to get prices like 30 cents, and there's even been discussion about Ripple making it as high as $5. So you saw the circulating supply there. I'm putting that out there just to show you what kind of potential could be there. But I'm saying if you're expecting Cardano to be a $1,000 coin or a $100 coin in the short term, that would be a bit overly ambitious, I would say. And I say that because I see a lot of people in the cryptocurrency market who get all excited about something, and they neglect to realize that market caps and circulating supplies are at play here. So I keep driving that home for the people who are new to the market. Okay, it's no big deal, but yeah. Anyways, let's take a look at their website. All right, so this is Cardano. Cardano is a decentralized public blockchain and cryptocurrency project and is fully open source. Open source is really important because
Welcome to Dragon. In this video, we will explain the economics of Dragon Coin and the mechanisms designed to maximize value for its holders. Dragon Coin are a utility coin. Its main...
Hey guys, you're here with Bo, and welcome to my review of Cardano. So first up guys, what is Cardano? Well, Cardano is a blockchain platform similar in terms of its context to say Neo or to say Ethereum. It's a platform that will allow decentralized applications to be built on it. Now the platform itself, or the blockchain, has multiple layers and it has been built with mass scalability, transaction speed, and security in mind. Now Cardano in itself is trying to be seen as credible, both in terms of the users or the market that they're trying to penetrate. So they're really aiming towards sort of the financial services industry, but government as well. And they've actually built in spaces for regulators to have what they need, because as blockchains grow, as more and more of these companies start to come out, the regulations are only going to grow as well. So Cardano have kept that in mind when building this platform from the ground up. My first impression, highly professional. Information overload, transparent, credible. Cardano is founded by academics, engineers, scientists, following the typical sort of academic procedure in terms of having things peer-reviewed, high quality. I mean, Cardano has been so well thoroughly thought out, so well documented, so well reviewed. It really is just an information overload in a positive way. There's just so much information that is available for anyone to research, which is a real positive. Now, also my first impression is there's a lot of value in Cardano from the get-go. And what I mean by that is they've already got a wallet, working wallet, which at the moment is currently still syncing. It's called Daedalus. Now, Daedalus, this wallet, aims to be a universal wallet. So at the moment you can see they're working on Bitcoin and Ethereum. It actually aims to be a universal wallet. And one thing that impressed me straight off the bat was the wallet itself is going to be a platform in itself that's going to allow third-party developers to exploit some of the capabilities of the wallet itself, to add different functions, to add different features. The wallet itself has got an 8-person team working on it, but that's available to download and use right now. So the platform has got almost immediate value in terms of deliverables, which is above many, many other cryptocurrencies out there. So they also have their own debit card. Right now you can get a Cardano debit card and actually spend your ADA cryptocurrency right now. So first up, one of the strengths is Cardano is a platform. Like many other successful cryptocurrencies such as Ethereum, such as EOS, such as Neo, the value comes in the ecosystem growing as more applications are built on the system. So because it's a platform, because it's an ecosystem, there is potential for huge value in the long run, especially if it's a technologically superior platform that is built with the future in mind, which Cardano has actually done. Now, Cardano also uses a public blockchain explorer. Now, this is a strength because I like this about cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, like Bitcoin. You can see what's going on in the network. Another strength, as I mentioned earlier in my first impressions, was just the abundance of resources. So you can see straight up here on the website, 5 languages: Russian, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, and English. So Cardano, you can see it's got 3 major Asian countries it's targeting, but the languages and the information available to you on the website is enormous. Now, Cardano, interestingly, has actually been built with social and community engagement, strategy, and development in mind. So they actually get the cultural side of cryptocurrencies, which a lot of people don't. A lot of people just look at the technology and think that just because there's a technologically superior platform that it's going to be number one. The cultural side of cryptocurrencies is really important, and Cardano get that, and they've built that into the system. And they've built that into their system by doing something similar to Dash, where they've included a decentralized trust. A decentralized trust where users can vote by ballot system where funds are used. So if funds need to be used somewhere, then the users of the system can actually vote on how and where those funds are actually going to be used. Now, given Cardano has been built by academics and engineers, they've actually built into the Cardano business model the requirement for developments to be peer-reviewed. Now, that's another major strength because you're getting objective opinions from a group of people on potential changes to the system. So having been a project manager on new technology development projects a few years ago, I had to go through peer reviews with some of the information or the operational standards that I was developing. I had to go through a peer review process. It was challenging, but that peer review process brought out so many improvements in the procedures that I was working on. So it is a very important function. It is time consuming, but you end up with a very high quality product at the end. Now, Cardano want to avoid issues like the Bitcoin forks, which have a real negative flow-on effect to all the communities, and especially people new to cryptocurrencies who are confused and who see these forks and the disruption to the community as a potential risk, and it destroys confidence. So Cardano have kept that in mind and have seen that and have used the lessons learned from things like Bitcoin to try and bring in a voting system for the users, like a user-based voting system where it's a democratized way of implementing certain updates. So things will be given to the community, certain updates will be given to the community for the community to vote on. Cardano are going to use a new proof-of-stake protocol called Ouroboros. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, or Ouroboros. Now, Ouroboros was developed, it's a new proof-of-stake system that was developed and released in the white paper you're seeing in front of you. But this white paper is extensive, high-quality academic paper, 54 pages, I think. This is a new proof-of-stake system that's been developed. I read through some of it. Part of the system itself is, part of its objectives are to be highly efficient using low energy when compared to Bitcoin's, say, proof-of-work system. And they're using a lot of random, a lot of protocols in it that produce randomness, and that adds to the security of the proof-of-stake system itself. Now, this proof-of-stake system is a pretty big deal because it's actually been presented, or it's being included at the Crypto 2017 conference. Now, this isn't particularly a cryptocurrency conference, it's a cryptology conference. There's been 37 of them, so you've got credibility again. You'll have leading experts in cryptology, probably blockchain and cryptocurrency there as well. So they've taken this proof-of-stake system on board, which just adds to, again, the credibility and the innovative nature of this new proof-of-stake system. Now, Cardano also has a really clear and outlined value proposition. Now, the value proposition for the cryptocurrency itself is ADA, is based on, or is called the Cardano Settlement Layer, or CSL. Now, Cardano is going to support two sets of scripting languages. One is called Simon, the other one is called Plutus. One for each of the settlement layers, and these have been purpose-built for Cardano. So think of it as analogous to Solidity for Ethereum. Now, I assume people will have to learn this new scripting language, but the benefit of building a purpose-built scripting language for their platform is they'll be able to maximize its capabilities and its flexibility on what can actually be designed on Cardano. Now, it's also going to provide support for sidechains. It's going to support multiple types of signature, including quantum-resistant signatures for higher security, support multiple user-issued assets, and work to achieve true scalability, meaning as more users join, the capabilities of the system increase. Now, Cardano actually consists of three major stakeholders. One being the Cardano Foundation, which is like a high-level body tasked on overall governance and developing standards and processes to try and standardize the development of both Cardano and blockchains as well. So they're actually trying to build some standards for developing blockchains. Now, there's also input-output. Now, input-output is the company contracted to actually build Cardano itself, and we'll go a little bit more into input-output soon. And there's also Emergo, if I've pronounced that correctly. So these are the three major stakeholders for Cardano. So it shows that there's some weight behind it, and there's a lot of individual stakeholders in terms of resources within each of these three stakeholders. So input-output is the actual team working on Cardano, and it's being run by Charles Hoskinson and Jeremy Wood. Now, I'm not going to go into each of the team members. They all speak for themselves in terms of their strengths. You've only got to look at the letters next to their names. PhDs across the board, very academically rich team, massive team, very credible. We're just going to have a little bit of a look at Charles Hoskinson because he has a very interesting background. So Charles Hoskinson, he's the CEO at Input Output. He's actually been around in cryptocurrencies and blockchain since 2013, and I say in this channel quite a bit. Not many people have been involved in cryptocurrencies for that long. You'd be surprised at how many founders of new cryptocurrencies would probably only have a couple of years under their belts in the cryptocurrency world. Charles, he's been around for a number of years, and he was actually the CEO of Ethereum. So the way I read this is Charles has taken all the lessons learned. He's taken all the issues that have happened on different cryptocurrencies over the past few years, and he's refined them, or he's improved on all those issues with Cardano. But Charles is also a good speaker. He's done a TEDx talk. I watched about 3/4 of it. For someone with such a technical background as him, he's actually a good speaker as well. So looking to Cardano's social side, which I do see as a strength with different platforms, because communities are huge in cryptocurrencies as well. Their Twitter, 9,700 followers. Not bad, not bad. Their Reddit, they have 7,343 readers. Now, if we compare that to similar sort of decentralized application platforms in terms of their social media followings, we have Neo has 137,000 followers on Twitter, 41,000 followers on Reddit. Ethereum, 212,000 followers on Twitter and 173,000 readers on Reddit. Now, Cardano is new. They're new. They're really only just released. They're only just releasing these developments now. They're only just coming into the limelight now. I'm sure the community will follow. Ethereum and Neo have had a lot longer, a lot more rungs on the board to build those communities. But it is a good gauge of the general market support level for a particular cryptocurrency. Alright, so that's the strengths of Cardano. So what about the weaknesses? Well, I'll be quite honest here, guys. These weaknesses are really nitpicking. I mean, I'm really clutching at straws with these weaknesses, so take them as they are, alright? But the first one is, in a way, I kind of think that they're ahead of their time. And what I mean by that is the culture in cryptocurrencies is interesting. Cardano brings a level of professionalism, it brings a level of academia, it brings a level of this tie into wanting to have the platform ready for government regulations. So they could be a little bit ahead of their time, maybe. Again, I'm nitpicking, and that's just my general feel. Take that for what you want. Another weakness, perhaps, is maybe they've started a little bit too late. And again, we're so early in overall cryptocurrencies, I'm nitpicking here. But you've got Ethereum, which has the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Massive organization of supporting companies that back Ethereum. So Ethereum has had a lot of time to build its market capital, to build its community, to build its foundation or its organization of supporters and followers. Cardano is playing catch up. Regardless of the technological superiority, they're playing catch up. Now, another weakness is they have a huge circulating supply of 45 billion tokens. Now, don't get me wrong, I have no doubt that the token supply is strategic. There's a reason it's high. It could be to try and keep the cryptocurrency stable. What I mean by that is it takes huge trading volumes to really move the price. This could be strategic. This could be strategic to show more credibility to the platform and also look years and years and years down the track. Because as the market capital of all cryptocurrencies grow, I mean the market cap right now is 341 billion. It's not even half that of Apple. It's not even half that of Apple. So the companies with large token supplies 10 years down the track when cryptocurrencies are worth trillions of dollars, it will be less important. It will still make a difference, but it may be less important. So perhaps that's their thinking here, is by the large token supply, they're thinking decades down the track. So what about the opportunities? Well, Cardano has a lot of opportunities here. And one is to bring credibility and industry-level high standards to cryptocurrencies. And I know people battle too with regulations in cryptocurrencies because the decentralized nature is tied into philosophical and ideological values around cryptocurrency, and that's fantastic. But certain cryptocurrencies will need or will require some form of regulation in the future. I see that as a no-brainer, especially if they're going to be adopted by government agencies. So platforms like Cardano that have this in mind are opening themselves up to multiple markets. And if they're on side of the government, they're potentially positioning themselves very well in the future as well. So they could also be the main decentralized application for government and the financial services industry. They could become the #1 for that niche. You might have Ethereum, which is in general private industry, and then you might have Cardano, banking, finance, government. There's an opportunity to fill that gap. They've also got the opportunity to implement and have effective the most efficient proof of stake system to date. Basically setting the standard for new blockchain companies to come in terms of their proof of stake system. Like that will be the standard. Low cost, efficient, proof of stake. This is the best, and this is what all the other platforms will strive to achieve. They also have the opportunity to develop standards for blockchain architecture, protocols, operation, usability, all that stuff through that Cardano Foundation. So they have the opportunity to bring blockchain and cryptocurrencies more to the mainstream, more to the academic side. So onto the threats. Now, pretty clear, one of their threats is Ethereum. Ethereum is massive already. Again, we spoke earlier, we have the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance already. Ethereum is enormous. It's the second biggest cryptocurrency by market capital. It's a beast. So that is a threat. That is absolutely a threat. There's also EOS. Now, EOS is another decentralized application in development. It seems at the moment that Cardano's got a head start. They've got the wallet done, they've got the card, they've got the roadmap, which they've got some developments coming next year. But EOS is another threat. I think what will happen in the future is there'll be a number of different decentralized applications that will fill a market need. I don't think one will win. I think one will always be the market leader. Which one that is, who knows? But I do think there will be room for multiple decentralized application platforms and ecosystems in the future. So guys, that is it for my review of Cardano. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, likes are always really appreciated.
Certain types of transactions are tremendously risky. For example, if there's a wire transfer between two American banks based in New York amongst large companies, this is very common and happens all the time. If there's a proposals.
Hi, my name is Duncan Coots and I'm the head of engineering for the Cardano project, and I'm going to talk in a bit more detail than I have in the past about some of the things we're doing with how we develop high assurance software for Cardano. So some of you might have read a blog post that I wrote some time ago now describing in very general terms how we are planning to improve the assurance of the software that you write. So I'm just going to recap that slightly and explain what is high assurance, what does it mean, and why is it important. And then I'm going to go into maybe a bit more technical detail about some of the interesting things that we're working on right at the moment. There's a whole team that I'm overseeing, and we're doing some rather interesting and exciting stuff at the moment. And I'll try and describe, without getting into what we're doing at the moment. So just to recap, what is high assurance, and what does it mean, and why should you care? So assurance is really about, can you be sure that the software that you're using is not going to fail? And it's as simple as that. It's about so think about it like this. Cryptocurrencies, inertia, or there's lots of reasons why people don't do it. prove, and indeed I think people have proved this, that the UTXO style of accounting that comes from Bitcoin, and it's the same style that we use in Cardano, that the UTXO model of accounting does meet the properties of a cryptocurrency. It does, prevent double spending, and it does. And you knew that already, right? You already assumed, because Satoshi told us that the UTXO model should prevent double spending, and but that's an informal statement. Whereas this is a mathematical proof that is true, right? You thought it was true, but were you really sure that it was true? How sure were you that it was true? Well, if you have a complete formal mathematical proof that it's true, then you can sleep easy at night. That's the point. So, yeah, you can prove things which you thought were true and you thought were obvious, but now you know them for sure. And when you're doing things that are much more complicated, that really, really helps. Okay, so maybe we should look at that's the general idea of proofs and reasoning about programs. Maybe let's turn to what are we doing at the moment. So as I said, we're not trying to reach really high assurance straight away. Right? We're going to do this step by step. We're going to improve the assurance, but it's not going to be high assurance, not in the sense of, like I said a moment ago, a complete formal mathematical proof, end-to-end, no ifs, no buts. What we'll do is we'll take particular chunks of the system and we'll do formal developments of those chunks of the system and then replace, let's take a brick out and replace it with a better brick, which we will have developed in a way that is higher assurance, but not necessarily high assurance, right? There's as I said before, there's different levels. But we're working towards that goal. So let's take a concrete case of a thing that we're working on right now. So as you know, Cardano is based on the Ouroboros blockchain protocol. Right? This is the underlying consensus proof of stake protocol that's been developed by academic cryptographers. And so that is a starting point, right? So the academics, the cryptographers, they went away and they thought for a year. And they came up with Ouroboros, and they wrote an academic paper and they had it published. And they are mathematicians. Cryptographers are mathematicians, and they made a formal proof that has been peer reviewed by other people, other cryptographers, other mathematicians. They've done a proof that their Ouroboros protocol has certain properties. Like, remember I said earlier, you might have properties like no double spending or whatever. So for the blockchain protocol, the properties that they proved, it doesn't really matter for this case, but let me just state them anyway, it's interesting. Let's see, what are the properties? So one of them is that there's a progress property that, given certain assumptions, it's always possible, in fact, it's guaranteed that blocks will be produced. And there's also not immutability, a persistence property, that once blocks are of a certain depth, in the chain, that they are stable, that they will not change under changes of like forking. Once they're a certain number deep, then the probability of them being forked is so low that it doesn't really matter. So those are the two properties, and they proved mathematically that their protocol meets those properties, that it satisfies that it has those properties. So that is our starting point for building the software implementation that implements Ouroboros. So what we are doing at the moment is we're doing a new implementation of Ouroboros. In fact, it's of Ouroboros Preos, which is basically the next version from the cryptographers. And so the point is that this mathematical specification that the academics, the cryptographers, has made is very high level. It's a very long way from the software. It describes what the protocol should do, but it's short and it's very. So the idea is now that chains and the version that broadcasts blocks are morally the same, or even better, actually provably equivalent in some formal sense. In the sense that they achieve the same outcomes, they achieve the same, that each node ends up with the same chain locally as they would under the original version. So that's an example of a refinement. So the point is that our approach is not to say, here's the spec, here's the implementation, we will directly prove that the implementation meets the specification, because they're so far apart. So instead we say, let's take the original specification and refine it a bit, refine it again, refine it again, refine it again, and keep going. At each stage we're making design decisions, etc., until we get to something that is low level enough that captures all the details of how the system has to really work. You know, it captures the details that we have to have a peer-to-peer network, that we have to work in bounded space. You know, you can't use arbitrary amounts of RAM for the system. That there are timing constraints, that things have to work using TCP. You know, all these kinds of details are not captured in the original high-level paper, but they have to be captured in the code, because the code has to actually do those things. So by having this series of refinements, we get closer and closer to the code. Let me draw a diagram. So here's a diagram to explain what I mean and what we're doing, and go into a bit more detail. So I said a second ago that we have this mathematical paper that's written by the cryptographers, and that's an academic published paper, and it has lots of mathematics in it, but it's not code, right? Remember, it's maths and not code. And it's written by mathematicians, cryptographers, as I say, mathematicians, and I'm a computer scientist, and so I look at this paper, and I look at it in a different way to the way that the mathematicians look at it. Me and my colleagues, and you know, we appreciate that it's got proper proofs in it, but we look at these kinds of things slightly differently and say, well, actually, that's really not as precise as we would like it, or it's not quite in the right form. We want to be able to reason about it in a different way. We want to use a different logical language for describing the protocol. And also, we aren't interested at this stage in the proofs of the properties of like progress and persistence that are that are proved in the paper. We're interested in what does the protocol actually do, because we need to implement it, right? We need to implement that protocol, and then you know, if we implement that protocol, of course, it'll have the properties that that the guys say it will in the paper. So our first step is actually to translate their description of the protocol into our description of the protocol, which is in a different formalism, a different formal logical language. So this is why I say over here there's maths and mathematicians, and over here there's computer scientists, who are different kinds of mathematicians, if you like. And so we describe again what the protocol does, how it works. So we have a formal language that captures precisely captures the.
This is about the game theoretic aspects of blockchain protocol, which are extremely important. When you analyze a protocol, you can think of different parties acting in a good versus bad, or bad versus good. So the adversary would like to subvert the honest parties. So you can think of them in this way, and in some sense this is the classic cryptographic setting. On the other hand, the way things work in the world is not so black and white, if you want. There is like rational actors that basically participate in the protocol, and they may have an incentive to deviate from the way the protocol operates. So while Bitcoin has proven to be quite resilient, we know that from an incentive point of view, the protocol does not work well, and it's actually possible to deviate from the protocol and get an advantage against players that actually do follow the protocol. So proving that following the protocol is an equilibrium from a rational point of view, this is something that touches on game theory, and when you have a complex game between rational participants, a Nash equilibrium is a strategy for participants that says, if I know that you follow the equilibrium strategy, it doesn't make sense for me to deviate from that strategy. One of the major updates, and something that I included in my presentation today here at Oxford about Ouroboros, was our proof that the protocol is an approximate Nash equilibrium, which basically states that parties are the incentive structure that the protocol provides, suggests that parties have gained no advantage by deviating from the honest protocol strategy. So if you have a malicious coalition that would like to change the way that the protocol operates in their own machines, they will not gain a substantial advantage compared to the other parties that actually follow the protocol. Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you everyone for being here for the crypto seminar. It's a great pleasure to be here and present to you Ouroboros. This is a proof-of-stake blockchain protocol that I will describe to you and its properties. So feel free to ask any questions during the talk. We can do this quite interactively. So I'm going to start with a general discussion about Bitcoin, blockchain systems, and what do they try to achieve, and what is the motivation for building a proof-of-stake system. So, well, you all know Bitcoin, and like many people have said, is a remarkable solution. So the question I like to ask is, what is the problem that it solves? So this is one of these like interesting settings that you have in crypto and distributed system theory, where you have a protocol which is very successful, and when it was introduced outside the usual cycle of scientific research, where problems are posed, and solutions are given and analyzed. Instead, what we had was a protocol which was launched in the form of an actual implementation in early 2009, and since then it became immensely successful. So understanding it from a computer science research point of view is a very fascinating question that also inspired me early on in this domain. So it's important to distinguish from the point of view of CS theory protocol solutions like what is the Bitcoin protocol and the objectives that they try to meet. And it's very important to understand these objectives, because only then we're able to reevaluate whether the specific solutions we have, like the Bitcoin system, for instance, is the ones that are best fit for the objective. So what you may call the objective that Bitcoin tries to solve is the notion of a robust transaction ledger, which is something that we have investigated formally in previous work, which I'll say a few words about. So once you have completely understood the objectives, then you can go and ask questions about whether the specific protocol design is best. And exploring this protocol design space with protocols and assumptions under which the protocols meet the objectives is what propels research in cryptography, but also in general in computer science. So the first analysis of the Bitcoin from this point of view was conducted in this previous research, which was joined with Juan Garay and Nikos Leonardos, which we call it Analyzing the Bitcoin Backbone Protocol. The intention there was to extract the main features of the Bitcoin system, abstract away things that were not relevant to a first analysis, and present in the form of
to, map onto my business domain. So how do you do that in a system that's blind, deaf, and dumb, that you can't change the protocol of easily? It's really, really hard. So you had all these people like Color Coins and Mastercoin and altcoins come out, and they tried to add a little bit more functionality through enormous pain. It was like putting nails in your hand. So we said, well, maybe there's another generation that we can do. Maybe there's some way where we can give people a programming language that can run on a blockchain, and you can build whatever application you want. It's a pretty insane idea, but we said, shoot, let's go for it. What was the historical analogy? It's more like the internet. The internet started with TCP/IP. It gave us a protocol to move data anywhere in the world, but it wasn't accessible for everyday people. You needed the web browser. And what happened to the web browser? It got a programming language. It got JavaScript. And then you could build Facebook, and then you could build Gmail, and then you could build all these great, beautiful applications. So analogously, what if we give a programming language to a blockchain? Then the world can build whatever financial applications they happen to want. This was the core thesis of Ethereum. And it's not something we came up with, like all great artists, we steal. Vitalik and others, we took it from Nick Szabo. In 1998, he wrote this lovely paper basically introducing the idea of the smart contract and saying that law will be automated, contracts will be automated. We can actually enshrine them in code with a bunch of nuances about what has to still be done by people and what can be done in an automated capacity. So we had no idea how to do this. Sergio Lerner had some ideas and other people did, and we just gave it a shot. And Ethereum turned out to be one of the most successful open source projects of all time. So that's where we came from. We came from the internet, which gave us the idea that maybe we should have money move just as quickly. And then we realized that we want our money to do interesting things, not just move it between Alice and Bob. There's always a story behind that. And how about we decentralize that story so we don't have to trust just one person? Okay, but where are we going now? So after the web browser was invented, did the internet end? No. People had to build the Amazons and the Facebooks and the eBays and all the great businesses, right? So what are the Amazons and the Facebooks and the eBays of the cryptocurrency space? Where are we going with that? And that's kind of the core thesis of this talk, is where do I feel things are going? So because people like a taxonomy, they like some sort of labeling system, let's call Bitcoin generation 1 and everything that came before that generation 0, kind of the proto-Bitcoin stuff. Okay, then Ethereum is generation 2. So Bitcoin was all about, let's move value between Alice and Bob. And Ethereum's all about, well, that value has a story behind it, and let's program that value up into a story. The problem that we're having, though, is now governance and interoperability and scalability. Now we have something that's useful. We have something that potentially millions of people could indeed build businesses around. But the problem is that if you look at the total available resources that Ethereum has, as advanced as it is, it will not scale to millions of users, much more billions of users. So, Generation 3 is all about asking questions of how do you get these systems to talk to the old legacy systems that still have trillions of dollars of value available to them? How do you get these systems to scale so that when you add a user to the system, it gains more resources like BitTorrent? And then it's also about the meta topic, and it's something that's caused Roger and a lot of other people a lot of heartache, which is governance. When you're a centralized entity, like your Google or your Facebook, and somebody wants to change something, there's a hierarchy. There's eventually a guy or a gal at the top or a committee that says once they decide it's done, it's by fiat. They go and do it. Pretty easy, right? But how do you actually change the code, update the protocol, add more features and functionality, increase the block size, give yourself a richer transaction language when no one is in charge? You know, earlier today we had Roger's presentation about this island, and you know, it's a tremendously complex project, but I think the hardest part of that project can end up being how do we all get along? Because we don't all get along. We have very strong differences of opinion. We come from different backgrounds, we have different religions, we have different incentives. If a person is making money off of your misfortune, you're probably not going to just be able to go up to that person and say, I know your livelihood depends on this, but can you please change for my benefit? You need a stick for that, right? So what's the stick there? And this is actually the crux of third generation cryptocurrency technology, where we're going. There's a lot of projects that are thinking about this now. It's about how do you pay for stuff? Like, for example, who is paying for developing Bitcoin? It's a good question. Is it the companies? Is it the governments? Is it universities living off the NSF? It's a little bit of everything. Volunteers. So what happens when one person starts paying 85%, 90%, 95% of all of the development fees? How much control does that person have over the roadmap and where things are going to go? If your job depends on that one person, what does that mean for you and your principles? You know, as Andre Napolitano mentioned, you have all these people like James Madison who come on in and they have great principles, but then they're in charge of things and suddenly they change. Similarly, when people pay you, when people have financial control and influence over you, wouldn't maybe you start making decisions a little differently? So that's a problem for cryptocurrencies because somebody has to be around to write the code. Somebody has to be around to vet the code. And what incentives do they have to do a good job? It's one of our big issues, right? So there's been some ideas, like Dash, for example, was one of the first innovators here. And what did they do? They created a treasury. They said, gosh, you know, we're paying all these miners to maintain the system. It's almost like a tax. Why don't we take a little bit off the top, the inflation that's created to pay the miners? And let's put it into a decentralized bank account, basically. And then let's let anybody in the whole wide world send a ballot to that treasury. And if a person approves it, if the stakeholders, the owners of the token approve it, the ballot will actually pay them automatically. Well, guess what? They implemented it, and now I think they have $20, $30 million a year to pay people building the protocol from the blockchain itself, not from a bank, not from a private entity, not from a government. So that's one side of it, the sustainability side. Can we build treasuries? Can we build financial systems that actually give people the funding that they need to work on these things? Furthermore, give people need the funding to market these things, to build their businesses on things, to migrate existing businesses to these things. The other side of it is, as I mentioned earlier, is this notion of soft forks and hard forks, changing things. What if I wake up and I direct my whole company and all of our scientists to start working on quantum-resistant signature schemes? Because a quantum computer is going to come out in 10 years, and Shor's algorithm is going to go ahead and end us all because we're vulnerable to it. Great. I can get all this great research done, go to Crypto 17 or Eurocrypt or ACNS, wherever, and show off my cool new signature, and we've done all that hard work, and now I have this beautiful code that's written, and I'm ready to go. So then who do I exactly go to put it into Bitcoin, or to Ethereum, or to any other cryptocurrency? I can go to Reddit. Anybody been to Reddit and had arguments and debates on Reddit? Was that fun? No. Okay, well, we know where you come from. All right, what about Bitcoin Talk? I mean, is anybody there? Anybody have fun on that? Well, okay, I don't know. Like, what is the canonical place that one goes to resolve these types of issues? Well, we don't have one. That's one of the biggest concerns, actually. It's a big meta problem. It's why it's been so hard to upgrade Bitcoin in a certain respect. You have incredibly brilliant people who have damn near unlimited financial resources and great networks at their disposal who have come up with proposals for how do we scale Bitcoin. And they're really, really at a deadlock. So much so, there's now another Bitcoin version called Bitcoin Cash. They couldn't agree. It went down the wire and it split into two completely different cryptocurrencies. Similarly, with Ethereum, we had some debates about something. I disagreed with the DAO bailout. And guess what? There's Ethereum Classic now, and Ethereum. By the way, Coca-Cola Classic's better than New Coke, right? So, by ETC. So anyway, that's one of the biggest issues, is you need to have some sort of mechanism to decide how do we change things once people propose it. That quantum immune signature scheme, I'll go ahead and propose it, Bitcoin improvement proposal, or Ethereum improvement proposal. You need a system to allow you to do that. So the third generation about cryptocurrencies, the things that are coming, the ones that are really going to be valuable, the ones that are really going to change things and allow us to grow, and actually allow these things to get enough users where they can start influencing law and governments and central banks. Those require governance. Those require scalability. Those require interoperability. Final thing we'll talk about. What is interoperability? So let's say he's Bitcoin, and these two guys here are Ethereum. The problem with Bitcoin is it's blind, deaf, and dumb. It doesn't know there's a whole world outside of it. It just thinks that Bitcoin is the only thing that exists. Even clones of Bitcoin, like Litecoin, where very little things have been changed, they can't talk to each other by design. Ethereum's a little bit better because you have programmability. So you can kind of write a smart contract up and you can build a relay or something like that, but they're very expensive to run. So you need some accommodation for identity and metadata, and accommodation for relays and other standards that will allow these blockchain systems to talk to each other. Because at the end of the day, we're going to end up having thousands of them. Some of them are going to be private permission systems running between the banks. Some of them are going to be completely open ledgers like Ethereum. Some of them are going to be like semi-public, semi-private like Ripple, for example. And every single one of them has value and stories locked up in them. And interoperability is incredibly important, or else you have two parallel financial systems at war with each other, one of which doesn't really do much for the other. So I think that's where we're going to go. Now, what research is being done? One of the advantages I have running my company, and this is my third company, I originally started Ethereum with Vitalik, and before that Invictus Innovations with Dan Larimer, and we did BitShares. With IOHK, we're a research company. We have 3 research centers, one at Tokyo Tech, love Japan, one at University of Edinburgh, love Scotland, and Greece is awesome, one at University of Athens. We have a bunch of scientists. So we have the luxury of actually looking into the tech and the science and getting a sense of what's real, what's not real, what's possible, what's not possible. And the good news is that I think within 3 to 5 years, almost all of these problems can actually be rigorously solved. The reality is we've already figured out how to scale to billions of users. I assume everybody here has either a Twitter profile, LinkedIn profile, or a Facebook page. Well, guess what? They figured out how to scale. And we can do the same thing. We just have to make some adjustments because the trust model is different. Similarly, the network protocols have to be completely overhauled and refined, and how we store data, and even the architecture of a blockchain itself probably has to be changed. But again, all these things can be solved.
What can't be solved in a lab is the social stuff. And that's actually the really exciting thing, is how do we actually get people to coordinate? How do we actually get consent? Like voting, for example. How many people here voted for the current president we have? How many people here voted for another candidate? How many people here wish we had more than the choices we had in 2016? Right. So it's not who you voted for, right? It's who's on the ballot, and how does the person get to be on the ballot? So similarly, maybe I can get my quantum immune signature scheme on the ballot, but maybe he can't, even though his is better. So you don't even get to pick. You don't even get to choose. So who gets the vote? How do you get things on the ballot? The ordering, whether it's Condorcet or Borda or a linear preference ordering style system or a plurality system, all of these things are deeply interesting and really matter. But the most exciting thing about cryptocurrencies is this is like societal evolution, Darwinianism in real time. It's so fast. When we first started, we were talking about how do we issue an asset. Now we're talking about how do we buy islands and build our own governments. It's been 5 years. Think about how quick that is. And there's actually some legitimacy here because we can build our own money. We can make our own laws. We can do our own things. So that's why I'm in the space. That's why I started input-output, and this is why we do what we do. We're taking care of the science side. Of ways to tools that nobody in human history has ever had before. The same information. You want to come up to the mic, or? Okay. For Ethereum Classic? Yeah, so the question was, so first off, there's a token called ERC20 on Ethereum. So these guys want to issue their new token, let's call it Foo Coin, and it's the best coin ever. Basically, the way you do that on Ethereum is to use a standard called ERC20. In the Ethereum Classic community, we noticed that there were some minor problems with ERC20, that we created a different standard called ERC223. They're equivalent to each other. Yeah, I think ERC223 is a superset, and I have no problem with it being a standard, but it's ruled in a decentralized way. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about in Hong Kong in November. Okay, that'll be fun.
What happens in Hong Kong in November?
Oh, there's an Ethereum Classic big event. All the developers are coming together and so forth, and we're going to talk about the future of Ethereum Classic and the roadmap and standards and things like that. So that's why I'm in the space. That's why I started input-output, and this is why we do what we do. We're taking care of the science side, but you guys, the entrepreneurs, are going to have to figure out about the social side and propose a lot of different systems and ways to govern things. And the good news is you now have a set of tools that nobody in human history has ever had before. Everybody on the planet has access to the same information. Everybody on the planet has access to the same units of value and the same marketplaces. That's never happened before. So anyway, thank you so much for your time, and I'll be glad to take any questions that all you guys have. You want to come up to the mic, or? Okay. For Ethereum Classic? Yeah, so the question was, so first off, there's a token called ERC20 on Ethereum. So these guys want to issue their new token, let's call it Foo Coin, and it's the best coin ever. Basically, the way you do that on Ethereum is to use a standard called ERC20. In the Ethereum Classic community, we noticed that there were some minor problems with ERC20, that we created a different standard called ERC223. They're equivalent to each other. Yeah, I think ERC223 is a superset, and I have no problem with it being a standard, but it's ruled in a decentralized way. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about in Hong Kong in November. Okay, that'll be fun.
What happens in Hong Kong in November?
Oh, there's an Ethereum Classic big event. All the developers are coming together and so forth, and we're going to talk about the future of Ethereum Classic and the roadmap and standards and things like that. I don't know. I mean, I would be in favor of a standard. To be honest, we have to change the entire virtual machine. So we did with University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign a project to formalize the EVM using something called K. And we were able to write this really dense white paper that showed that the spec that Ethereum currently has isn't so good, and there needs to be considerable improvements to the EVM. Once that's done, it makes more sense then to create a token standard, because the token standard would be a consumer of the underlying infrastructure. And if we make the infrastructure better, we may be able to create a better meta token. Next question. All right, you first.
Please talk more about the ETC developers. So I'm a Solidity developer myself.
Okay.
I didn't go with ETC at all, but I'm still bothered that they still have language up on ethereum.org.
So how do you like Solidity? Do you like your tooling? Do you like...
That's wonderful, yes. But I would love to look at ETC,
Yep.
but I don't know anything about the community.
So my company has a research team and a development team. It's called the Mantis team. We built a 100% new code Scala client, which will be released here in November. So it's on par with Parity or Geth. We have 6 full-time Scala developers who develop that. And there's 2 other teams, the Ethereum Commonwealth team, and then there's the ETC dev team, which was the original team that actually precipitated the fork. And most of them are volunteers. And so one of the things we're going to talk about in November is formalizing things, getting some permanent funding for people, and also what is the vision and the roadmap. But for example, Metropolis has just come out, so we have to make a move to that. The other thing is that proof of stake is coming with Casper, but the community is very keen to stay with proof of stake is coming with Casper. The community is very keen to move to stay on proof of work. But if we're to do that, we need a scalability roadmap for it. So the developers are quite good because some of them work for me. I'm not going to complain about them. But it's early days. You need probably another 6 months to a year to really build a strong identity. And at that point, there'll be rapid divergence between the 2 platforms. As for programming languages, one of our hopes with Grigori's work over at University of Illinois is to give you the ability to write smart contracts in the languages you've come to know and love, such as Java, C, JavaScript, and so forth. It, to me, is a little crazy to say, hey, there's this whole new platform, throw away everything you've ever learned and learn this new thing for an unstable language with bad infrastructure that's really hard to debug. And oh, by the way, code is law, so if you make a mistake, you're brutally punished by Old Testament gods. Right? Lots of laws, no mercy. So instead, what I'd like to do is say, hey, how about we formalize something with K, and then any language we've actually written in K, we can use a technique called semantic-based compilation, and it'll allow us to auto-build a compiler from that to the EVM. So we've already have Canadian semantics for Java, JavaScript, and C, and actually a language we created, a functional programming language called Plutus, specifically for smart contract development. So once we have the SBC stuff done, you can just write smart contracts in those languages, and they run on the infrastructure. That's our hope. And then to add new language support, you just write the semantics in K, which takes about 2 to 4 weeks. So our hope is we can have a huge, huge supply of languages that developers can use, and they're not forced to use Bamboo or Viper or Solidity or all these other things. Now, it is a natural question to ask about SDKs and syntactic sugar and other things to make it a little easier to run the smart contract. But there's also a lot of open questions about resource awareness and static analysis and dynamic analysis and so forth. And those are all academic questions that never were actually rigorously stated when we created Ethereum. So that's one of the deficits we're trying to make up with teams at Carnegie Mellon and University of Illinois and so forth. Do you have a particular question?
Is the conference open to Ethereum?
Yep. Anybody can come. It's an open conference. We're non-aggression people here. If you show up, you can do whatever you want. Just keep your shirt on. Yes, in the back. What's going on in the state level? So when cryptocurrencies first came out, they were a novelty and a curiosity, but nobody really paid any attention to them. It's like, who the heck cares what all these pasty white nerds do in their mom's basement? Now we have things like capital controls, which are actively being evaded in Ukraine and in China and in other countries where this matters a lot. A friend of mine runs an exchange in China, and he told me the horror story of what recently happened there. So after China started getting very aggressive on things, he got a call up and said, you will show up on Tuesday to this office building. He said, okay. You ever get a call like that where a government official calls you and says, come in on Tuesday? Not could you come in on Tuesday? It's the difference between China and Japan. So he shows up, and there's this U-shaped table, and there's all these Chinese bureaucrats at the table, and they just start yelling at him for 45 minutes, destabilizing the peace, destroying cultural harmony. And at the end of all of it, they said, on Friday, come back with a plan to shut your exchange down. No debate, no questions. And he said, where is all this coming from? And they said, it's not us, it's Beijing. And they implied heavily that it had to do with capital controls, as well as the leadership conference. So we are seeing more authoritarian governments, or governments that really like control over money, taking a second look at these things and saying, well, maybe they aren't such a good idea to run after all, and we want to control them through some sort of back channel. The problem with this technology is it's extremely difficult to control. So the minute that people actually get these nodes, they get these things in their mind, they get incredibly creative with ways to evade things. But nonetheless, we see a lot of crackdown coming, from crackdown against ICOs, saying, hey, these things are securities, to crackdown against the free trade of these things, to crackdown against operational components. Like there's a big open question of what's going to happen to the mining pools in China. if the Chinese government's now anti-Bitcoin, a very substantial part of the mining capacity is in China. And it's not like you can just grab your miner and run. These things are warehouses, they're huge. So they require some sort of buy-in from the local government. So the short answer is I actually don't know what's going to happen in a global sense, but I can speculate that what we're going to see is a transition where more laissez-faire libertarian-esque governments like Switzerland will continue to embrace and reap enormous financial benefits as a result. More ossified countries like the UK and the United States will doggedly hold on to regulation for a bit until they're forced to throw in the towel, as they did with the internet. And authoritarian countries like Russia and China and other wars will try to find a niche where they can control it. And where and how they can control it and where and how the cronies can make money, it will be very legal. And where they can't control it, a lot of people will go to prison. Does that kind of answer your question, Max, or do you want me? Right. Right. That's a very good, yeah, if it happened, yeah, of course, Bitcoin would probably have a 10 or 100x minimum. As with all things, central banks have a diversified monetary policy, and it depends upon the particular central bank and its role geopolitically. I believe that there's actually some Caribbean central banks that have already considered or have used cryptocurrencies as a part of their portfolio. Gabe Abed would know more about that. But then in terms of the Federal Reserve System, they tend to be a little bit more conservative, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. The US government also still does own some Bitcoin, usually because they seize them from people, and that's how they end up getting them. Good old civil asset forfeiture, right? Or these things. But it brings up a broader question of, okay, is Bitcoin the standard to go with, or maybe do you go with a portfolio, or maybe they just create their own asset, like this notion of a banker coin, where the central banks create a settlement unit, and that becomes the reserve. I actually don't know, and frankly, I don't think the central banks themselves know. If you talk to a lot of the local central bank guys, because the Federal Reserve is a little bit decentralized, the ones outside of DC and New York, they're actually very pro-competing private currencies because they've always tended to be a bit more libertarian and conservative. The ones who are like in with the banks, they think these things are competitive threats and not so good. So they historically say, no, 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 we want nothing to do with this. We should have already shut this down. Why the hell are we doing it? Jamie Dimon's comments don't exist in a bubble. They're just a reflection of the environment that those people tend to live into. The last point is actually this notion of an internet of value, this idea of the liquefaction done. So I was recently in Europe. I went to many different countries. I never actually bought any local currency. I didn't use any paper money. I used my credit card. So what if on your phone you can have this idea of a universal wallet, and anything you own, whether it be gold, silver, dollars, euros, what have you, becomes a token in some capacity. And you could store all of them as you store Bitcoin on your phone. And what if there's a whole network of decentralized market makers floating all around? So what does that mean? It means that you can move at any time to one portfolio to another portfolio. So you can live in Ukraine, but have dollar-based assets and gold-based assets. You can live in Russia, have real estate in South America, some of your primary money. And here's where it gets really cool. Because this is all decentralized, and because we have decentralized market making, when you go to Starbucks to buy something, you can have your token that represents real estate in Argentina, and you could be in the UK and pay them in pounds sterling. They didn't know they accepted that. Just like when I pay with my card, they get paid in euros or Swiss francs or dollars or these types of things. So if we're capable of living in a world like that, we have to actually start asking, why does the central bank matter? Because at any time, I can just create any portfolio I want on my phone, and there's this huge global financial web that can move anything to anything. So I don't really have to care what's going on with the dollar. It doesn't matter to me. It's as consequential as what's going on with the drachma. By the way, it doesn't exist anymore. Question in the back. The first question is, what is a cryptocurrency? There's a lot of ideas on it, but we didn't exactly get from God golden tablets that told us the 10 commandments of cryptocurrency. So the challenge is not only developing standards, and there's actually been some attempts, like the IETF has some people thinking about it, the W3C has the Interledger Committee and the Web Payments Committee. So there actually are some real legitimate standards efforts that are occurring, but the bigger concern is, what is a cryptocurrency in general? What properties does it have? What properties doesn't it have? And how do you formalize that in a way that we can understand and actually iterate on top of? So there are some projects that are actually trying to solve this problem in a very abstract way. There's a project called Tezos. They recently raised about over $200 million. And what Arthur's doing is he's created a formal language that a machine can understand, that he can actually define a consensus protocol and a transaction language and your network stack in a way that a computer can understand, and to create a mechanism to change it to a new configuration. Now, if that work is sufficiently abstracted and that work is sufficiently good, meaning it's at bedrock, then that can become the foundation upon which all of these things could live, and then you would be able to actually create standards and standards paths towards particular different things. There also is an important thing to distinguish between private infrastructure and public infrastructure. So private infrastructure like IBM Fabric or Bletchley or what R3 Sev is doing and so forth, this is all about, I have a group of enterprises or an enterprise that's large with many departments, and we have coordination and synchronization problems where we can't agree on a common ledger for something like settlement. So let's create something that's not in anyone's control that allows us to vastly reduce settlement times or other problems between our databases and systems. What in the world does that have to do with Bitcoin or Ethereum? In some respects, there's some technological synergies there that are valuable, but in other respects, that's a closed, trusted system that defeats the entire point of what cryptocurrencies are about. So we're probably going to see enterprise standards form differently, like with the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance and others, from cryptocurrency standards, and we haven't quite yet seen a cryptocurrency standards body materialize. Now IOHK, because we love formal languages and we're all Haskell developers and we do high assurance code, we actually are thinking about how one would model both a smart contract as well as a full-on cryptocurrency protocol. And we've even written a paper called an ontology of smart contracts where we try to abstract it to its bedrock. But it turns out to be a devilishly hard problem, and it's something that we really enjoy thinking about. Sure. Okay, real quickly, and then these guys down here.
Just getting back to China real quick, if they do ban Bitcoin mining, what does that do to the price of it?
Well, everybody who's ever had a problem with mining in Bitcoin now gets to say, ha-ha, and we move on. You know, Bitcoin is the most resilient thing I've ever seen in the world. You know, if Bitcoin was a person, Bitcoin could go on a Grand Theft Auto style ride through the city, you know, killing people and setting buildings on fire, and the price would go up. And I've never seen anything like it in my life. You know, it's like China bans Bitcoin. It's like we're really serious this time, and this is one of the biggest trading markets. And it goes down $1,000. And then I get a call from Bloomberg, and they say, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Guys, don't talk to me for 3 days. Call me back." And 3 days later, it's back up at $4,000, and they never called me back for some reason. But no, I mean, this is the reality of things. So if the mining pools get hammered or hit, what's going to end up happening is we'll change the algorithm, or we'll see a relocation of mining hardware to different countries that are a bit more stable. Being very pro-America, maybe they can come to the United States, and that'd be great, and we can work something out there. But the point is that Bitcoin will live on. Either the consensus algorithm will have to change, maybe go back to a GPU standard. Maybe it'll go to some sort of hybrid algorithm, like we have one called Twins Coins that we'd be happy for them to use, or maybe even proof of stake. Or we'll just see a relocation of the hardware with a temporary drop of hash rate. If the hash rate drops by 60%, we're at Bitcoin last year. Was Bitcoin last year secure and work? Yeah, okay. So, it's an event, and Bitcoin is very good at surviving events. Yeah, somebody here had a question? Yes. Right. And Libya and Syria.
Yeah, Libya and Syria. So the question then is something like a comprehensive law. I guess my question is there a way that you see to play nice with this other force that wants to control? What does that scenario look like?
People who have the power to kill you and throw you in prison seldom make deals. When you have all the leverage and all the control, why would you in any way, shape, or form want to give some of it up? Cryptocurrencies are a continuation of a long-standing philosophy born out of the internet called the cypherpunk movement. It says we should be self-sovereign. We should be in control of our own destiny, our own money, and our own power. And the reality is the tighter the government gets, the more they seize people's assets and the more people they throw in jail, the better our technology will get. We have a great micro-example of this already. History, it doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So what was the prior lyric? Well, it was Napster. So you have these people say, wow, we can now share information anywhere on the internet. So they created centralized servers to do this. And the RIAA and all these other people came in and they just brutalized these poor guys and threw 12-year-old girls in jail and sued people for millions of dollars. And what did we create? We created BitTorrent. And now more people watch Game of Thrones illegally than they do legally, and HBO's never made more money. What does that mean? It means the old model of thinking expired due to innovation. So if the government really clamps this hound down, what are we going to see? Huge investments into ZK snarks. Huge investments into anonymous transactions and anonymous network stacks and so forth. And now we live in a paradigm that's so dangerous to the government because not only do we have control over our own money, the government doesn't know how much money you have. Think about that. Because I can just have 12 magic words in the back of my mind that have $5 million on them. No wallet, no nothing. I just remember 12 magic words that can at any time regenerate my cryptocurrency wallet. And now I have access to that $5 million. So I just have a shirt on my back. I can go from country to country and then regenerate my wallet, take some money out of a Bitcoin ATM, and then destroy the wallet again, right? Nobody even knows I have it. So what does that do to our taxation system, which is predicated on the fact that they know how much you make? It means we have to move to a sales tax, doesn't it? So maybe we'll get a fair tax out of it. And so similarly, there's a whole bunch of other regulations like KYC and AML. KYC and AML are built on the tattletale system. So let's say Michael there runs a bank, which he actually did. He created Netherlands Bank. There's a great story about the Prince of Dubai or something, giving him a stamp. But anyway, let's say he owns a bank. Well, what does the regulator do to Michael? They say, Michael, that guy over there, we're a little worried about him. You need a tattle on him. You got to fill out what's called a SAR, a Suspicious Activity Report. So the regulatory bodies, they don't just sit down with binoculars looking for people. They let the banks tattletale on people. But what happens when everybody's a bank? Are you going to tell on yourself? That whole regulatory system that's been constructed starts evaporating. They lose control. And that's what I think is going to happen. It's going to become harder and harder to know how much money people make. It's going to become harder and harder to get compliance with the KYC and AML regime. And as a consequence, we're going to see an exodus of capital from these locked down, terrible jurisdictions that want total control to jurisdictions that embrace freedom. And because those countries are prospering, they get more control in the overall macroeconomy of how the world works. And so we'll see a gradual movement towards freedom in a certain respect. This technology is basically like the antidote for the evils that we see in the system, at least in my crazy view. Yes, sir.
So there's been a lot of speculation as to how valuable Bitcoin is on Ethereum and some of these other coins. What's the thinking? I mean, does that make sense to you, or is it
Right, well, okay, you have a pile of gold, and when more people want to buy that pile of gold, does it mean we get more gold in the pile? No. So we have a scarce resource. It's artificially scarce, but it's done in such a clever way that basically it is what it is. So if there's more global demand that comes in, necessarily the assets have to become more valuable. That does not mean they're less volatile. In fact, quite the opposite. Usually when you have a big group of people come in, you see much more volatility until you create products to dampen the volatility in a certain respect. It's less of a question of how much is it worth. It's more of a question of what parts of the economy can it be used in or replace. So the point of Ethereum was we gave a better toolkit to people to do more. And similarly, if Bitcoin is to survive, it must adopt that same mentality over an arc of time, or else what it'll become is digital gold. Basically, it becomes an artificial store of value in the internet that we just through pixie dust and magic agreed is worth what it is, and people buy and sell and trade it. But it will not be a payment system, and it will not be a currency. That hasn't been invented yet. There's no cryptocurrency on the market or anything coming yet that's at that capability that can grow and replace PayPal and Visa and all the other networks. I mean, just think of it for a moment. You have to create a value stable currency if you plan to do lending. You know, imagine if you took a loan in Bitcoin in December of 2012 and you say, pay me, I'll give you 10 and I'll pay you 11 back in December of 2013. You took $100, you have to pay back $12,000. Now let's do that again from 2013 to 2014 in December. You have to pay back $2,000. Does that make sense for anybody? No. So you need to actually dampen volatility to have value stability. That's just one problem. And there's hundreds of them and so forth. So that's my overall view on these things, is that you have a lot more to go. But you know, value is disconnected in certain ways from utility. It's very speculative right now. Yes, sir.
So we just witnessed a very large fork that created $5 to $10 billion worth of cash out of maybe.
Which is bigger than any ICO, by the way. Just to point that actually you had the whole ICO market together. Bitcoin Cash is worth more. No. You misunderstand completely. Where does value come from? It doesn't come from the fork. I can fork on this stage right now Bitcoin with my cell phone if I wanted to. Push a few buttons, deploy another repo, it's done. The value is people. People live underneath and behind and prop up the cryptocurrency. And what did we have going on in Bitcoin? We had two factions that really just stopped getting along a long time ago. It's like mom and dad are fighting a lot. And at some point, mom and dad got to get a divorce. And they did. So mom took her friends and dad took his friends. And now we got Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. The reason why Bitcoin Cash is worth something is because there's people behind it. So if you can resolve the governance problem, you pool things together. People have an incentive to be together. If you can't, you pull things apart, and we end up having hundreds of micro camps of people. There's still value there, still trading going on, and we have now an internet of blockchains. So the question rather isn't, will this continue to happen or not? It's a question of what will happen if we have good governance versus bad governance. But the value is always constant. It's nothing to do with the code, it's everything to do with the people. Bitcoin is right now the most primitive of all cryptocurrencies, and it's the most valuable. It's most primitive because it was the first. Ethereum is one of the most advanced. There's ones coming after it that are even more advanced, worth less than Ethereum. So it's not the technology. All right, one more question. I already asked her. Yes, sir. Oh, with Bitcoin? Maybe we'll have another one. What should you call it? Like Bitcoin Classic? Bitcoin Cash Squared? Tricoin? It'll be like He-Man, I have the power. I don't know, man. I mean, I spent a long time in the politics. I know Mike Hearn pretty well, and he got kind of railroaded as well. And I gave up on it. That's why I'm in the altcoin space and we build things. You know, Sergio Lerner is one of the best guys I've ever met in the entire space. He's down in Argentina. He's an incredible InfoSec guy. He discovered a bug where you could create billions of Bitcoins out of thin air. This is how long he's been in the space, and he fixed these things, right? So he was actually one of the first guys to talk about Turing-complete smart contracts. This was 6 months before Vitalik. And what's the first thing Sergio did? He went to the core developers. Oh, we should change the scripting language to allow us to have these new capabilities. No. So the problem is, even if you have good ideas or things are happening, these camps are so volatile and so difficult to deal with, and they pull apart so much that I imagine we'll see more forks coming. They're not bad things. It just means that divorce happens. Mom and dad can get remarried. They can have more kids. They can live a prosperous life. It just means we don't consolidate all the value into one thing. It's only bad for the people who hold Bitcoin. All right. We good? Okay. Sorry, guys. I wish I could take more questions. Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun.
Very good. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charles Hoskinson, and I'd like today to talk a little bit about the future, namely the future given to us by something that can decentralize it. So I'm a mathematician, and as a mathematician, we like to do things like Venn diagram everything. You know, we like to build our models. So let's break the world up into two buckets. Let's look at the banked and documented world, and let's look at the unbanked and undocumented world. So the green bucket has about 4 billion people living in it, in places like the United States, the European Union. And then we look at places like China, we look at places like India and Brazil, and we start moving into the unbanked and undocumented world, places like Sudan, places like Afghanistan. Well, what's the point? Well, the point is, if you were to look at every meaningful metric, from infant mortality to literacy rates, quality of life, it tends to get better with the more financial services and the more access to documentation that you tend to have. So let's elucidate this a bit with an example. Let's take a look at two people. Let's meet Jeremy. He likes cereal. He's about 30 years old, and he's born in the United States. He has access to a passport, driver's license, birth certificate. He has credentials. He went to a university. Not a very good one, but he still has a university. He has a good work history. He owns a house. He's got a car. He's probably like somebody everybody knows. Now let's take a look at his financial history. Well, he has a bank account. He's borrowed money before, and he had to pay for that house and that car. He has several insurance policies, so if he hits you with his car, if his house burns down, if he gets sick, he has the means to cover that via proxies. And he's a very good son. He sends money to his mother in Indiana every single month, so we like Jeremy. And he's currently engaged in several contracts. You can just have them how you will. And he buys lots of stuff on Amazon and on eBay. Okay? So now let's meet Hamid Khan. He's a slightly different person. He's in the other circle. So Khan is born in Afghanistan. He's between 45 to 44 years old. We're not entirely sure. He doesn't have any formal documentation. Khan has learned several trades, but it's very difficult to understand his work history. Furthermore, he lives on undeeded land, which means that where his house is, where he lives, he has no documentation that he actually owns that. Let's say he's lived there for 2 decades. He still doesn't. He uses a bicycle for transportation, and he has a very difficult to verify criminal history. What does it mean for the Taliban, for example, to say you're a criminal? So let's take a look at his financial life. He lives in a cash economy. Everything is cash. All of his money he takes with him. His credit comes from friends and family. All of his assets are obviously uninsured. He receives money from his brother in India, and that cost him 15 cents on the dollar, the remittance cost. All of his agreements are verbal, and he has absolutely no access to the internet. This is the reality for about 3 billion people worldwide. It's a very tough reality. So what are the differences we should focus on? What should we learn from this example? First, Jeremy, he sends his money at a very low cost. It takes only a few days, maybe it's a few percentage points. On the other hand, Ahmed, that's 15%. So let's look at the numbers for everyone. The worldwide remittance business is about $540 billion. 192 million people living away from their home countries send money home, and that total of money is about 400 billion. And the cost of moving that money sits somewhere between 8.6% to 12% on average. It's a World Bank estimate, but it can be much higher depending upon where you live. Try sending money to Syria, for example. Let's look at Jeremy. He has low-cost access to credit. When he gets a loan, he can get a long loan, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, depending upon the asset. And the interest rates are fairly decent, let's say 5% to 10%. Now, even if Hamid Khan had access and a cultural inclination to borrow money, if you look at the global microfinance rates, they're about 35% to 40% interest, according to a CGAP estimate. Azerbaijan is sitting at the top, Afghanistan sits at the top, and even 35% for South American nations. It's just terrible. If you look at Jeremy, he has the ability to objectively bind contracts, assets, and property like land. When he owns a house, he owns it. He has his deed. He has his car. If he goes to prison for 5 years, he still has assets. They're there waiting for him when he comes back. On the other hand, Ahmed is completely off the grid. So let's imagine something. Let's think about a war breaking out, and the land that you live on, you have to flee. And you come back 5 years later, and there's somebody living on that land. Who owns it? Is it yours? Is it theirs? How do you resolve that dispute? That's a reality that 3 billion people must live in. If you look at the economic cost of this, Hernando de Soto Pilar is a Peruvian economist, good friends with Bill Clinton. He actually sat down and calculated that there's about $10 trillion worth of wealth that's just locked up due to this lack of documentation. This is all wealth that we can unlock, we can exploit, we can do things with. People could actually grow economically, but unfortunately they can't. And finally, this is incredibly important, especially to Bermuda. Jeremy can manage his risk via insurance. Whereas among Khan, he has very limited tools at his disposal to protect himself from disasters or risk. If he gets sick, if he dies, there's just no one to cover that. So these are the problems that he lives. These are the problems that billions of people around the world have to deal with on a daily basis. So it's very natural to ask, how do we solve this? What do we do? Let's propose something. Well, my belief is that this technology, this Bitcoin thing that everybody seems to be talking about, actually has inside of it some solutions. And I have my nice little cryptocurrencies. There we go, cryptocurrency, yay. Okay, so I call it the transformative triumvirate, big fan of Roman history. And there's really 3 things here: blockchains, decentralized transaction systems, and smart contracts. What in the world do I mean? Let's go through them. Let's talk about blockchains first. So basically what a blockchain is it's just a big database. If you're going to store something like who owns what, you need that database to be secure, you need it to be tamper resistant, you need it to be distributed. And it turns out that Bitcoin actually has probably the best distributed database in the world. It solved a very hard computer science problem just to exist. And here's the key. Once you put something in a blockchain like Bitcoin's, it's there forever. It can't come out. We have every single transaction since Bitcoin was invented. It's there since January 3rd, 2009. So that means it's the perfect place to put identities. It's the perfect place to put agreements, property rights, these kinds of things. And it's totally censorship resistant. Even if it's inconvenient data to a government, inconvenient data to an individual, you can't pull it out once it's there. So let's look at some examples of what's already been done. So Namecoin is a project that wants to replace the entire DNS system of the internet. You ever wonder why when you go to Microsoft.com or Google.com, how that all gets sorted out and who owns what? That's ICANN's DNS system. It's a centralized solution. They're based in America, a lot of international participation. Namecoin is saying, let's completely disintermediate everybody. It's a totally decentralized grid where we actually have a new DNS system. BlockSign actually allows you to take contracts like non-disclosure agreements, anything you can think of, and actually verify them and sign them using the Bitcoin blockchain at an incredibly low cost, less than a penny. Now, let's look at the transaction system. This is near and dear to my heart. I've started 2 ventures in the Bitcoin space. Both of them were funded in a distributed fashion. The second one was Ethereum. So this brilliant kid named Vitalik Buterin last year came up with this idea. He wrote this white paper. He's 19 years old. And I read it, and I said, damn it, I have to help him start this because this is brilliant. And we decided to have a fundraiser. So we published a little address, and we said, send a transaction. And over a course of 42 days, 9,011 transactions, we raised $18 million. And the cost to raise that money was only $350 in transaction fees, a price of 0.002%. This is the magic that a young kid who's a college dropout living up in Canada can write a white paper, bring a team together on 4 continents, and within just a matter of months have a fundraiser for over $18 million to get the resources he needed to do something. And this is accessible to everyone. No one controls it. Now let's look at smart contracts. This is really where the magic actually happens. So a contract is basically an agreement having a lawful object entered into voluntarily by 2 or more parties, each of whom intends to create 1 or more legal obligations between them. This is why I'm not a lawyer. I don't like reading those things. So a smart contract says that's great and all, but you still have to have third parties involved in the verification process, the facilitation process, the enforcement process. What if we could algorithmically do this? What if we could take a contract and write in some sort of specialized programming language, play around with it for a bit, and this can actually be done over a decentralized grid. And we can have that same immutability and censorship resistance and certainty that we have with our transaction system. Well, it's not a new idea. David Chaum and Nick Szabo first thought of it back in the 1980s and 1990s, and that brilliant kid, Vitalik Buterin, and another brilliant kid who works for a competitor, Ripple, actually came up with a way of doing this using Bitcoin, the Ethereum and the CODIS projects. So what does this actually accomplish? Well, you can think of any centralized service that's online, like eBay, you can think of a Dropbox, you can think of exchanges, and you basically can build a decentralized equivalent. You can also think of services like hosting. So you have Amazon EC2, you have Rackspace. You pay some money, you can use their servers. Well, what if, just like folding at home, where they fold proteins, instead of doing that, we can actually tokenize hosting of web services. And people can just leave their laptops on, their desktops on, and make a little bit of money. And the aggregate grid becomes the world's largest web server. Combined with the centralized DNS system, you actually have an entirely new internet. And all of this is actually possible because of smart contracts. So let's bring this all together. Let's bring this back to why we care. We care about Hamid Khan. So what are his problems again? He needs reputation, he needs credit, he needs to be able to manage his risk, he needs low remittance costs, and he would love to be able to actually prove he owns the land that he lives on, especially if he has to flee it. Well, blockchains enable him to build a censorship-resistant, always accessible digital history. Everything that he does, if he does it through a blockchain-based solution, it's there forever, and it's completely disintermediated from his government. So it doesn't matter who's in charge, what's going on, the particular political whims, it's there. And I can see that, and I can start building things like credit metrics and risk metrics on that. Okay. Second, just like me, his brother can now send things at much less than a penny. And if you think of that $540 billion remittance market with 12% going to middlemen, it's going less than a penny, less than 1%. It's a beautiful thing. And finally, because we have these smart contracts, we can start talking about building microfinance and microinsurance, decentralized networks. What does that mean? Think of Kiva, think of Lending Club, think of the Grameen Bank, and imagine if they had some sort of Frankenstein child. But that Frankenstein child is completely peer-to-peer, anybody can access it, they can use it at a low cost, and now you, anyone, can go ahead and click on someone, send them $100, and actually get repaid through that network and have a 90 or 95% repayment. That's the beautiful emergent properties of having reputation combined with a money transaction system combined with programmable finance. That's what you get for that. The same deal for microinsurance. You can take a lot of innovation that's been done recently for poor nations and actually have insurance policies that are $50 or $100 and make them profitable. And once you actually have a set of these things, you can securitize them. So it's a very promising emerging field. So there's one last problem, and this is kind of the kicker. Only 40% of the world's population is online, which seems to be a little low, but when you think about the age of the internet, that's actually quite amazing that something has grown so fast. So how do we get internet to Hamed Khan? Well, in just the same way that we can build a decentralized lending network, in just the same way we can build a decentralized insurance network, we can also actually build a decentralized ISP. So you can actually use technologies like CJDNS combined with old hardware like Wi-Fi routers and cell phones and just a little bit of hacking and finagling, and people can become micro ISPs. Just like they can mine Bitcoin, they can now provide internet services to their local community. And there are several other solutions to getting it without necessarily having to use the internet proper. For example, BitPesa, based in Kenya, is trying to find a way to distribute Bitcoin solutions across the cell phone, which makes sense because they have a digital currency there called M-Pesa. And finally, BitNation is probably the most ambitious. They're actually building a global network of ambassadors that are going to provide a full suite of services. So it's a very rich field. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But one thing I do know is that the future is going to be decentralized, just like TED. Thank you.
For millions of years, humans lived together in small, decentralized network communities of about 30 to 70 people. Everybody knew everybody, and it was hard to get away with doing bad things. But then, about 10,000 years ago, something happened that changed the course of history: the invention of agriculture. Agriculture allowed people to produce food on a scale they hadn't been able to before. It allowed not just a few people, but thousands and even millions of people to live together in large societies. But humans have a memory limit, known as Dunbar's number. We can only remember about 150 people well. So in these large societies of thousands and even millions of people, we could no longer remember everyone that we interacted with. There was the rise of anonymity, and anonymity threatened the social order. This created an opportunity for strong men to arise to restore social order. These strong men instituted social systems that were top-down, centralized, command and control. This kept the social order, but with great power comes great abuse. So the people that lived in these centralized societies suffered great abuses. They paid a big price. But this was the only way to organize society on a large scale. So people put up with these abuses for 10,000 years, the entire span of recorded history. Then, about 500 years ago, there was another change that started turning the tide of human history back to the decentralized society that we'd lived in for millions of years. So when you look at the whole span of human social evolution, the span of 10,000 years of centralized society, which is really all that we remember, is actually just a blip in time. It's a short transition phase that takes us from the decentralized society of our past, which was on a small scale, to a decentralized society of our future, which allows millions and billions of people to live together in a decentralized way. But what is it that allowed us to again live together in a decentralized way without those centralized structures? What is it that allowed us to bridge and transcend Dunbar's number? People-based trust systems don't scale beyond Dunbar's number, but technology-based systems scale virtually without limit. So it's technology-based, the emergence of technology-based trust systems that allowed us to organize society on a large scale without centralization. The first of these technologies was the printing press. It started with the printing press about 500 years ago. The printing press has no memory limit, and the economics of printing allowed ordinary people everywhere to cheaply record and communicate ideas across the whole world, free from the restrictions of the centralized state and the centralized church. Communicating these ideas with people freely, without censorship, inspired the first democracy movements. People started challenging the state, started challenging the church, developed their own ideas about how they could do things. But the printing press was only the first of a long series of technologies, the most recent of which are the internet and Bitcoin. I refer to all these technologies put together as the technology of trust. Where human-based trust systems don't scale, technology-based systems scale virtually without limit beyond Dunbar's number. So we can once again live together in a decentralized way, but on a large scale. The technology of trust has 4 pillars. The first of these pillars is decentralized communications. Before we can do anything, we need to communicate what we want to do. And decentralized communications has 2 essential components in the modern world: the internet and cryptography. The internet and peer-to-peer decentralized technologies such as BitTorrent are now enabling people to communicate without censorship. So centralized power structures can no longer control the flow of information. However, the internet by itself is not enough. We need cryptography, because without cryptography, the centralized structures can still use surveillance and censorship of what we communicate. And this impacts our freedom of speech, our freedom of thought. To have freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom of action, we need privacy-enabled communication systems. So the internet plus cryptography gives us that. The second pillar of a decentralized society is decentralized law. So first we communicate about what we want to do, and then we come to an agreement how we want to cooperate. And for that we need decentralized law. The 3 essential components of a decentralized legal system are choice of law, choice of adjudicator, and choice of enforcer. Choice of law means that we can choose the law that applies to our agreements and our interactions. So for example, we do a contract and we can choose the law of England or the law of Switzerland, or we can even make up our own law. Choice of adjudicator means we can choose who hears our disputes, who resolves our disputes. And finally, choice of enforcer means we can choose who it is that enforces our contracts and legal judgments. These 3 principles sound like very radical ideas, but it may surprise you to hear that these are actually not untested theories. This is the original way that our legal systems operated. These ideas date from prehistory. These were the cornerstones of the legal system of our past. It's only in the past 10,000 years of increasingly centralized societies and increasingly centralized legal systems that we've gradually forgotten about this these building blocks. And today, it's almost impossible for us to imagine how we could have a legal system that's decentralized in the way that I've just described. It's time to bring back these ideas and to reintroduce them into the modern world so that we can really operate a decentralized society. I and other researchers have developed a complete legal framework for a decentralized society that operates on these principles. And in fact, we're already implementing these principles and these legal systems in our businesses and in so-called startup cities. Following the examples of Hong Kong and Singapore, there are now entrepreneurs building so-called startup cities in developing countries, autonomous regions of developing countries that desperately need jobs. And we're building these startup cities with these advanced legal systems that allow people to create jobs and generate wealth on a scale that hasn't been possible in today's world. Today's world is suffering from so many laws that it's virtually impossible to do anything. And these countries desperately need jobs, they desperately need wealth creation. So these are very exciting developments. The third pillar of a decentralized society is decentralized production. Just like we've had with decentralized communications, decentralized production allows us to bypass the censorship of centralized systems. And there's two essential elements of decentralized production. First of all, decentralized materials production, and secondly, decentralized energy production. Decentralized materials production includes technologies such as 3D printing. With 3D printing, anyone, anywhere in the world can download a design from the internet and print this out at home, print out their own products. So this bypasses the restrictions that seek to control the flow of goods across national boundaries. The second component is decentralized energy production. We are now starting to see, we're in the early days of decentralized energy production that will allow people to produce their energy cheaply at home at a virtually unlimited quantities. And together, these will move us from the systems we've had, like the days of the Pharaoh, one guy controlling an army of thousands of slaves. Today we've got Apple having factories in China with tens of thousands of workers. This will move us to much smaller systems where people can produce their own goods and services at home without censorship. The fourth pillar of a decentralized society is decentralized finance. And the essential components of a decentralized financial system are, first, a decentralized currency, and secondly, decentralized contracting systems. The invention of Bitcoin is one of the most important breakthroughs in human history. For the first time, we have a decentralized currency that cannot be censored, cannot be controlled by any entity, by any government. The invention of Bitcoin has sparked the emergence of a whole new digital finance industry that is building an ecosystem around Bitcoin that will develop digital financial services, goods and services, products and services. The most important of these is decentralized contracting systems. These contracting systems, for the first time, offer a complete universal transaction platform. So on a single integrated platform, you can do literally any kind of financial or legal transaction. And these two technologies put together, so decentralized currency with decentralized contracting platforms, give power to ordinary people. Today's financial system is highly centralized. A few people pull the levers of power, and we are at their mercy. A stark example of that, for example, is Cyprus. One day people thought they had money saved up over 30, 40 years, and the next day they heard that the government was going to confiscate 40% of their assets, and there's nothing they can do about it. But with these technologies, you have the power back in your own hands. So those are the four pillars of a decentralized society, and there's a logical order to them. First, we communicate about what we want to do. Then we agree the terms of our cooperation. Then we produce what we agree to cooperate on. And finally, we trade the goods and services that we've produced. Together, these technologies form what I call the technology of trust. They will enable ordinary people to communicate, to come to legal agreements, to build products and services, and to trade without interference from third parties. So what does the world of the future look like? Imagine a Maasai warrior on the plains of Africa who has no access to the banks, the financial services, and the whole infrastructure that we take for granted in the developed world. He is cut off from the global economy. He has no bank account, no lawyer, no financial services. This severely limits his ability to generate wealth. But he has a mobile phone. And soon, using that mobile phone, he can start with a business idea. And within minutes, with a few clicks on his mobile phone, he can incorporate a legal entity, and he connects to a global transaction platform that allows him to safely and securely do business with anyone in the world, including people that he's never met, people that he cannot trust. And the transactions, the integrity of the transactions is guaranteed by the technology. This dramatically improves his ability to generate wealth. Billions of people in Africa, Asia, and South America, and elsewhere are going to be raised out of poverty, dramatically improving their standard of living. With just a mobile phone, everyone is going to have access to all the world's knowledge, technologies, products, and services. The combined force of these technologies will force the old, centralized, coercive monopolists to change. They will have to become competing service providers that serve the needs of all of us. This is going to lead to a radical transformation of our communication systems, our financial systems, our governments and legal systems.